This module would provide a general overview of Tier 2 implementation utilizing the PBIS framework. Additional modules are available in this series regarding teaming, interventions, and evaluation. Our learning intentions for today. In this module, we will define Tier 2 and its foundational principles. We'll clarify why schools implement Tier 2 and how it benefits students and staff, and we'll explore practices within the Tier 2 PBIS framework. Our work is always anchored to our strategic framework. PBIS specifically speaks to Goal 2 within the Compass to 2025 strategic framework. Our division acknowledges that students' well-being and social-emotional learning is a priority in developing equitable and supportive learning environments. Every goal within the strategic framework has an embedded equity emphasis. Within Goal 2, we are focused on engaging in culturally responsive practices division-wide. We identify and address inequities in discipline practices by investigating and implementing best practices and by seeking innovative solutions. Throughout our PBS modules, you will notice how equity and culturally responsive practices are integrated within all components of PBIS implementation. PBIS teams at each school are guided by a specific decision-making process within the PBIS framework. This framework involves examining our data, systems, and practices, and starts with identifying what our goals or outcomes will be. Our overarching goal as educators is to improve student social competence and academic achievement by creating positive, safe, and engaging learning environments. But to reach or improve our outcomes, we need to review data, which can include discipline referrals, SEL survey data, classroom data, and attendance data. And then practices are key to improving the outcomes. Practices are the strategies we use to support students at every level. In PBIS, these practices are supported by research to target the outcomes schools want to see. And the systems are a way schools support the adults. In PBIS, these systems support accurate implementation and practices. Within a multi-tiered framework of support, at least 80 to 85% of students should be responding to the universal supports put in place in the classroom and across the school. Universal supports include relationship and community building, common language of expectations, consistent structure and routines, student engagement, pro-social behavior acknowledgement, and effective responses to inappropriate behavior. Tier 2 practices and systems provide support for students who are not successful within Tier 1 alone. This focuses on supporting students who are at risk for developing more serious problem behavior before they start. About 5 to 15% of students participate in Tier 2 supports or interventions. If a few students, around 5%, are not responding to Tier 1 and Tier 2, Tier 3 interventions can be developed through SRT. These are more individualized interventions. The work beyond Tier 1 will involve the same application of data, practices, and systems. When planning for implementation of Tier 2 interventions, we continue to monitor the fidelity of Tier 1, which will increase the success of interventions in Tiers 2 and 3. Tier 1 includes practices such as clearly defining 3 to 5 behavioral expectations, using school-wide and classroom matrices as a system of teaching, reteaching, and reinforcing expected behaviors, utilizing a school-wide acknowledgement system to recognize and reinforce expected behaviors, using data monthly to review school-wide behavior and to problem solve, and maintaining a two-way system of communication with our stakeholders, where we not only deliver the information, but we also ask for and use their feedback. Interventions get more intense as students move up the triangle. There's more time invested by teachers, family members, and we collect additional data. Within school-wide systems that are in place, schools are able to identify which students need additional support. Tier 2 interventions are continuously available, and there is a rapid response to begin the intervention once a student has been identified. There may be some individualization in this intervention based on student need. Tier 1 supports are still available to students who are participating in Tier 2 interventions. And as we know, tiers of support are not mechanisms for labeling students, but the framework helps to identify interventions. Students are not Tier 2 students, but students who may benefit from Tier 2 support at a particular time. We all have strengths and weaknesses. We may be proficient with reading and writing, but need more support with the use of technology. In this example, a student's strengths are indicated in the green, and she needs more support within the skills moving up the triangle. The student doesn't need support for everything, so we don't want to label that student as needy in all areas. We want to focus on strengths. The next example is a behavior example. If we focus only on weaknesses, we don't acknowledge the whole child. We can use student strengths and assets to reinforce and support the areas of need. Tier 2 interventions provide additional opportunities for social emotional skill development and the reteaching of expectations and replacement behaviors. Additional structure and predictability, increased opportunities for feedback, support to prevent problems from getting worse. Tier 2 also provides a continuum of supports for students at risk for not meeting behavioral expectations, sufficient and appropriate interventions matched to student need or function. As schools consider tiered interventions, it may be helpful to review examples of interventions being used throughout our school division. Here we see a version of the division-level resource map for social, emotional, and behavior support, as it has been shared in various professional learning sessions throughout the school year. The division resource map is included in a resource section in this module. The resource map is a result of a collaboration of staff across the division, led by members of the PBIS Division Implementation Team. The document is organized into 3 sections: green, yellow, and red. The green corresponds to Tier 1 supports available to all students across the division. The yellow area corresponds to Tier 2 group level supports, and the red area corresponds to Tier 3 individualized supports. This can be a helpful resource when identifying Tier 2 supports available at your school. You may want to think about what interventions are already in place at your school for Tier 2. Notice that check-in and check-out is one Tier 2 intervention listed on this document. Throughout this Tier 2 professional learning series, we'll provide more in-depth information about check-in, check-out. If you have questions about it right now, please talk to your Tier 2 team and or your administrator. We begin with the end in mind, as this is our roadmap for Tier 2 fidelity inventory. It contains 13 features broken into 3 categories: teams, interventions, and evaluation. The modules in this series explore each of the features as well as a scoring rubric in more depth. You can also find this at pbis.org. Thank you for participating in today's learning. We hope this module provides you with a general overview of Tier 2 implementation in Virginia Beach City Public Schools.